Hello, everyone. This is Regular Guy, and this is the fifth installment in my series on wheat. Now, before I talk about wheat, I want to talk a little bit more about these two people. I want to point out that they are both artisans. They're both highly skilled. They can draw, they can sing, they can dance, they can ride horses. The woman is still able to leave town, get out of town if things get bad. Okay, she can move with the seasons. She's still a hunter-gatherer, I guess. The man doesn't appear to be a hunter-gatherer, unfortunately, and so he's kind of stuck. He's got he's going to have Gilgamesh for pretty much the rest of his life. Now again, Gilgamesh is doesn't have any obvious need for this person, but that could change. Okay, Gilgamesh is keeping vital statistics, it turns out, on this man for a reason. We'll see why in a little bit. Now, in order to explain what's going on here, I really need to skip down to the end of chapter 4, because this, I think, really should have been presented before the other information that Scott gives us in chapter 4 that we haven't talked about yet. All right, writing. Now, Gilgamesh operates on about the same level as Beavis and Butthead, or at the very least, it's reliant on people who it feeds off people who are on about the same level as Beavis and Butthead, and that's a problem because Beavis and Butthead can't write or read. Now, neither can these people, but these people, they have oral traditions that they keep alive through song, dance, rhyme, meter, all that kind of stuff. So they're capable of keeping sort of their culture, their traditions alive. They can transmit information. They can transmit memory. This woman at one point must have visited somewhere where sugar is grown because she's knowledgeable about sugar, and she's able to transmit information about this crop that grows thousands of miles away from where she's located, despite the fact that she's illiterate. Okay, so illiteracy, fairly common. Really, everyone's born illiterate. You have to be taught to learn how to read and write, right? So it's kind of an artificial technology. And it's not one that Beavis and Butthead could have come up with, all right? Now, what Scott says is that between 3300 and about 2350 BC, there were a bunch of state-making experiments that were going on. You know, Gilgamesh is coming into is coming into existence. And Scott says something utterly remarkable and without historical parallel was taking place here. On the one hand, you have these idiots, the priests, strongmen, local chiefs. They're no smarter than Beavis and Butthead. They're just a little bigger. They were able to kick them off the block, kick them out of the house. But they're just as dumb. They're just as lazy. They're trying to get back to sofa, same as Beavis and Butthead. But then remember, they're augmenting their population from time to time with hunter-gatherers. And so they're bringing thousands of cultivators, artisans, traders, and laborers into the mix, okay? Into the agglomeration of people that Gilgamesh is feeding off of within its walls. These people are being repurposed as subjects. So what that means is that these mobile artisans, okay, they're being brought into the fold by Gilgamesh in order to help support the population. All right. And Scott says it's roughly at this time that writing makes its first appearance. Okay, so it looks like maybe these artisans may have been the ones who invented writing. Thing is, they didn't have a use for it. They didn't need writing. They had their songs. They had, it's easier to teach a kid to sing a song than to learn to read and write. But Gilgamesh finds utility in this because it's through reading and writing that Gilgamesh can keep track of things like vital statistics on its population. Okay, and for the first 500 years that writing exists, that's all Gilgamesh does. So down here in red in Mesopotamia, it's more than 500 years until people start using writing for literature, mythology, or even keeping lists of kings, genealogies of kings, chronicles, religious texts. Nobody bothered to write down the genealogy of the king for 500 years because Gilgamesh didn't care. Gilgamesh was trying to record vital statistics about its population, its hosts. Uh, Gilgamesh, as you might imagine, is a sloppy record keeper. Okay, Gilgamesh doesn't do a very good job. A lot of the records that Gilgamesh ends up producing are just junk. There's a lot of lies, a lot of stuff that gets left out, a lot of stuff gets embellished. The records that Gilgamesh creates are just kind of generally no good. Can't rely on them. But the records do tell us what Gilgamesh was trying to do, at least. Gilgamesh was trying to organize its hosts into producers, soldiers, slaves. And it was dividing them up, trying to measure their capabilities, their numbers, all that kind of stuff, using things like location, age, and gender, okay, to determine somebody's what Gilgamesh could do with somebody. Now, a lot of people ended up just falling into these labor gangs. They seem ubiquitous. Okay, so you got a town here, like these settlements that have like 20,000 people in them, and then looks like they got 840 rations being meted out to labor gangs. So it's a pretty good percentage of your population right there, 840. In a town that might have 20, 25,000 people in it. This writing system they came up with originally looked like this. Just kind of some scratches, some lines. And they're just trying to record storehouse supplies and withdrawals. All right, that's all this is being used to do. So they got these artisans, like, make us something, we can use to represent ideas, make little pictures. So that's what they came up with, okay? Cuneiform. All right. They're using this cuneiform to assign something like work points that would show credits and debits and work assignments. So everybody had to do some work. I guess you got like points for doing work. And then, at the end of the year, I guess, tally up your points. Livestock, slaves, and laborers were classified by gender and age. Okay, age, I'll come back to that in a little bit. Actually, I'll talk about it right now. These people here, they're living under, they have the England variant, okay, of Gilgamesh. And now this image was taken, we're told, in 1910, okay? Now, a few years later, the England variant of Gilgamesh would find itself competing with the German variant, and all men between the ages of 18 and 40 were subject to conscription. Gilgamesh could give them weapons and tell them to go fight. So it's important to know, it's vital to know this man's age in 1910, because he's younger than 33. His life expectancy may be dramatically reduced due to Gilgamesh, right? So being born a few years earlier, if he'd just been lucky and maybe he's 35, when this picture's taken, then he might still make it. Might still make it to old age at least. Might be able to reproduce at some point, pass on his genes. Back to Scott. This writing in China, it was used by this dynasty that only was around for about 15 years, okay? This dynasty, this is some really out of control Gilgamesh. Very aggressive about systematizing, creating order, mobilizing the population, all this kind of stuff. This very fast-growing Gilgamesh took a lot of, characters out of the writing system here, simplified it, eliminated a quarter of the ideograms, right? The script they were using wasn't a transcription of speech, so it could be used kind of universally. No matter what language you speak, you could use that script. I got rid of all the local practices and measurement, because again, Gilgamesh doesn't want to have to do any, well, we'll get to that later. But Gilgamesh is lazy. Gilgamesh can't really think. And here we get to the household registration for the head tax and the conscription. And so that's what that man in the striped suit has to worry about, that conscription. Physical mobility is bad. Now, Scott has to put this down here in the section on writing, but whatever, we'll get to that. Talks about this whole system making everything more rational. Now, I think he should have said efficient. Scott isn't a mathematician. He's an anthropologist, so he thinks in terms of words, but maybe doesn't have a head for numbers. I don't know. But I think a good analogy here would be bees building hexagons in their honeycombs. If you look this stuff up, you'll find all kinds of people saying that the hexagon is more efficient, allows them to make maximum use of the space inside the beehive. It saves on resources, all this kind of stuff. So it's the same kind of deal. Gilgamesh is like that. Gilgamesh is always pursuing this efficiency, but there's a balance that has to be struck. And this Chinese dynasty, I guess, went a little too far to one extreme, and so that's why it burned out as fast as it did. But anyway, it kind of illustrates what Gilgamesh is trying to do, okay, through this writing, okay, and how writing and everything relates to this this impulse that Gilgamesh has to create structure and order and bring efficiency sort of to the whole operation, the way that it operates internally. Scott, again, reinforces here what we already know, just from seeing these two people, that you don't need to be able to read and write in order to transmit culture. Greece, we think they had all this culture and stuff, but they also went for 400 years without any writing. And then when they learned to write again, they were using a totally different writing system. But they were able to keep their culture alive through songs, rhymes, meters, plays, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, the culture didn't disappear. Okay, the Odyssey and the Iliad were being preserved in oral form, oral traditions. Okay, same thing that this woman, this man are experts at preserving, communicating, teaching the others. Okay, now that's the end of chapter 4, but I actually skipped over a bunch of stuff in the middle. So now that I got writing out of the way, I'm going to back up and go cover the earlier stuff that didn't talk about yet. As I said many times already, I'm offering wheat here as an alternative to matrix simulation theory type stuff. I'm saying wheat gets you there. All right. Why? Well, turns out that Gilgamesh, in order to have some kind of a coherent structure that can grow and thrive, just like a tumor, there's a kind of algorithm, a kind of math that's working, just like in a honeycomb. There's a kind of math that's necessary. And I think for shorthand, you can think of it as matrix algebra. And I think that's helpful too, because there's a movie called The Matrix. They decide to call it The Matrix. AI, if you think AI is doing this, AI is just using matrix algebra. So Gilgamesh also wants to do some matrix algebra. You can think of Gilgamesh as having like an Excel spreadsheet, okay? It's going to do everything. It's going to spit out a number that Gilgamesh can use to grow, basically. But in order to, it needs that number to be big, okay? Whatever the spreadsheet calculates, you want that number to be as big as possible. But in order for that number to be accurate, you have to fill in one cell. There's one cell. You got to put in numbers. So that's why you need your writing. There's one cell you got to populate in that Excel spreadsheet to do your matrix algebra. And it turns out, in order to populate that cell, it's easiest to do it if you're working with cereal grains as opposed to any other type of food. And that has to do with the fact that cereal grains ripen at a predictable interval, okay, regular interval, maybe once a year, twice a year, but it's a known interval. You can calculate it in advance, and that lets you save time. So when you're going out and you're doing your calculating, you're computing how much food is out there, cereal grains make it easy to populate that Excel spreadsheet because they're above ground. You can see them. You know when they're going to mature, so you can get out there at the right time. It's similar to how I was saying earlier that hunter-gatherers, they follow the rhythms of nature. If gazelles are migrating at a certain time of year, the hunter-gatherers go to where the gazelles are migrating, and they, harvest a bunch of gazelles, and then they sit back down on the sofa, just like Beavis and Butthead. Okay, that's how they save labor. Gilgamesh is doing the same thing. Gilgamesh is saving labor by uh, having people grow something that it can see easily, something it can count easily. And since it harvests at these regular intervals, like the gazelles, migrate at regular intervals, Gilgamesh doesn't have to be out there all the time looking for what it needs. It knows when to go out there and harvest whatever it needs, and then it can go back to sitting on the sofa. Gilgamesh is interested above all in the ease and efficiency of appropriation. And it's not any different, really, from Beavis and Butthead trying to get their nachos. They're trying to get them easily and efficiently. They don't want to pay a lot of money. They don't want to walk far. I think they literally want the gas station to give them the nachos for free. But in any case, nachos aren't free, so they have to try to get them at the lowest cost possible, minimum effort. So that's the eternal struggle that they're engaged in. So potatoes, no good because they're underground. Can't see them. And they don't have like a fixed time interval when you have to harvest them. Okay. Grain, you can't just let it sit out in the field and harvest it when you feel like it. You have to get out there and harvest it when it's before it goes bad. So Gilgamesh knows when the grain's coming in, when you're going to be out there getting grain. And so it can plan everything around that. It can use grain basically as an easy way to make it, to do the math it needs to do in order to populate that one cell in the Excel spreadsheet. Standardization, also important because it saves people from having to think, okay? You want Beavis and Butthead, when they're handing out food rations to slaves, you can't expect them to sit there and compute the caloric content or whatever they're giving the slaves. Give them a scoop, like a measuring cup, or give them, something like that, something standardized so they don't have to think. Now, these people, as I said, are afflicted by the England variant of Gilgamesh, okay? And the England variant, at one time, it had a kind of style associated with it. And so that's kind of why you see these growths or whatever on these people's skin, okay? That's why they look like that. But Gilgamesh itself has no real aesthetic preferences, okay? These bowls here look about like what you'd expect Beavis and Butthead to make if, they were forced at gunpoint to attend a pottery class for a month. All right, this is what the bowls would look like. It looks like what happened was that Beavis and Butthead made like 10,000 bowls, and then someone went and found 6 of them that held exactly 2 liters, and they said, we're going to use these ones because they hold exactly 2 liters. That's all they want to do. Ration bowls for slaves. Maybe. Scott put a question mark after that, so he's not sure. Well, he thinks they're definitely for slaves, just not sure what they were putting in the bowls. In any case, these don't look like the bowls that you see or the vases that you see typically when you look at, stuff left over by ancient societies. Usually they have some paintings on it, some people with bows and arrows, people in chariots or something. That's because you might have been looking at like, the Greek or the Egyptian variant of Gilgamesh. Okay, they might have had those, but Gilgamesh in its purest state, okay, that's the aesthetic that it strives for, those bowls. Okay. All right, Scott's repeating himself. Why not chickpeas or, any lentils or whatever? Talking about the crops. He's got a hit on this. He's not a mathematician, so he's not great explaining some of this stuff, but it's just really somebody's trying to do matrix algebra. They need to populate a cell in a spreadsheet. They need it to be easy. Ideally, you want someone who on the level of Butthead to be able to do this stuff, okay? Because that's what you're working with. Gilgamesh is feeding off these hosts, but it has some ability to amplify portions of the host that it likes. I pointed that out before. Use the host has, if the host is good at taking care of geese, then Gilgamesh might amplify that portion of the host so that the host can take care of geese that lay eggs made out of gold, some kind of metal egg. And so, similarly, Gilgamesh may want to amplify the parts of humans that can do this kind of stuff, like count, take samples. Again, the writing goes with that. But, notice Gilgamesh only needs bare minimum level literacy, okay? For 500 years, it only used writing to record vital statistics and that kind of stuff. Didn't even bother to write down the names or the genealogy of kings. Gilgamesh didn't care. Same with those bowls. They're ugly. There's no designs. There's no, they're not painted or anything. Craftsmanship is poor. Gilgamesh doesn't have high standards when it comes to that kind of stuff. Does have standards, You got to come up with the standardized measuring cups, okay? Those are very important to Gilgamesh. Grains, because they're easy to measure out in measuring cups, they're very useful in that respect if you need to distribute some food on a pinch to your population because there's a famine or the city's under siege or something like that. Much easier to do with measuring cups than sacks of potatoes or whatever, bananas or something like that. Bananas, you can't really store them, but these grains you can store so that, if there's a war or something, or let's say you got to send soldiers out into battle and you have to send food with them. Well, it's kind of hard to send your troops out with a whole bunch of bananas, but you can send them out with a few sacks of grain. That does it. These other people floating around out there. Now, there's still some of these shifting cultivators, hunter-gatherers out there, okay? Still quite a lot of them. But Gilgamesh can't really do anything with them. Can't figure out what they're doing. Doesn't understand what they're doing. Can't make sense of it. Can't fit them into the spreadsheet. Could conceivably try to do that. Go out there and find a way to tax those people. But the thing is, it's not worth the investment of effort that it would take. Okay, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. All right. Says ironically, Scott says this happened to Turks. They were nomads who came down from Central Asia. They were nomads. They led that kind of life. That was who they were. And then they came to Anatolia, and then they became afflicted with Gilgamesh, I guess. They started dreaming about sedentism and, elevated sedentism, and they became sedentists. And all of a sudden, they looked at these nomads, and they thought, these people are crap. Kind of ironic. Scott says a lot of this, I don't know, ethnic chauvinism, maybe even racism. It has a lot to do with what kind of food webs people eat off of. You see people that are eating off totally different food web than you, food web you don't understand. Just going to look down on those people, or at least think they're different. So the Romans, they thought a lot of these people up in Northern Europe were weird because they were cooking with butter and lard and stuff and all that stinky stuff. They're like, eesh, down here Rome, we're using olive oil. These not like these smelly barbarians. Now, here is where Scott really drops the ball in chapter 4. Starts talking about walls. Now, he's got a pushy argument he wants to make. Okay, he wants to say that if cities had walls, or if Gilgamesh is building walls, he thinks it's fair to believe that Gilgamesh is doing this to contain the population as much as to protect his territory from invasion. Okay. Now that's not intuitive, and it might even be a controversial assertion. And Scott, the most he can say in favor of it is that the situation is complicated. And then he waffles at the end of this section. Okay, talks that may have been either or. Okay, he's not committing himself one way or the other. Now I say he drops the ball here because he fails to mention an important point that he made earlier in the book. So that's why I didn't highlight too much here. Just leave this portion of the text there let it hang out a little bit. But mentioned earlier in the book that the hunter-gatherers, the barbarians, let's call them, they had two tendencies that in the long run were detrimental to their overall population numbers. Okay, if you recall earlier, I discussed this little population boom that happened between 10,000 and 5,000 BC, and while the numbers weren't significant, they did. There was a demographic shift that was taking place that Scott mentions. Fewer and fewer people were uh, hunting and gathering as a way of life, and more people were becoming sedentist. And Scott says that hunter gatherers may have been part of the problem. They may have contributed to their own decline because they had this habit of selling each other into slavery. That's one thing. So you have hunter gatherers selling other hunter gatherers as slaves to the sedentists, or maybe to Gilgamesh. And then the other thing that the hunter gatherers are doing is they're serving as mercenaries, as soldiers. Okay, that man may end up becoming a soldier, right? He's still got a shepherd's crook. He's got his connection to that. His past as his ancestors at least were pastoralists, I think. Um, so that's going to further reduce your population numbers if you're producing all the people who are going to go and fight in wars for Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh can keep sitting on the sofa. Gilgamesh doesn't have to put a lot of thought into this stuff, just needs writing to figure out where you live and what your age is and all that kind of stuff. Gilgamesh can use grain to figure out how much food it keeps to keep you alive, and create these measuring cups that it can give to Beavis and Butthead so they can give you just enough food to keep you alive, get you through the day so that you can get out and do some more work the next day or fight in a war. So I'm wondering why Scott, when he talks about walls, doesn't mention this habit that hunter-gatherers had. If you're Gilgamesh, okay, and you want to boost your population, the last thing you want is for your people to go over and become slaves, on somebody else's land. You also don't want them fighting as soldiers somewhere else. So walls are maybe useful in that respect, but then here in this section on walls, Scott doesn't talk about that at all. He doesn't bring up any of this stuff. He talks about containing mobile populations fleeing state control. But what about, you know, state populations that just have no loyalty to Gilgamesh? They're willing to go link up with another tumor somewhere else. Gilgamesh can't have that either. So another reason to invent writing to prevent that kind of stuff from happening. Anyway, I'm the regular guy, and that's the end of chapter 4. Signing off.